The original Hollow Knight is an amazing game, but its charm system has always been a bit of a mess, so about 9 months ago I went ahead and reworked it. Now Silksong is out, and with it a brand new system in need of rebalancing. I want to go through every single tool in Silksong, tweaking some and reworking others. In this first video I'll cover yellow tools, and if this gets enough support, I'll do blue and red as well. So if you want to see this become a series, you should hit that subscribe button right now. YouTube tells me whether you subscribe while watching this video, and if you do, I'll know you want more. A few things to clarify before we begin. Tools are split into 3 colors, but there's some confusion about why, since blue and yellow often seem to fit the same role. Here's how I think the tools are meant to be categorized. Red and blue are for combat, yellow and blue are permanent. To help support these distinctions, I've conjured up the following definition. Yellow tools offer non-combat related boons or effects that aren't obviously beneficial. Finally, here are the rules. 1. Every tool should feel worth using, and no tool should clearly outclass another. 2. I will aim to make as few changes as possible, although drastic measures may sometimes be necessary. And 3. If a tool does not fit its color, I am allowed to change it. With all of that out of the way, I'm Holland, and these are the Silksong tools rebalanced. First up, we have the compass. I'm sorry, I can't. Why in the world are we still using this terrible card design? I'm gonna have to get my brother on this. Freddy?
Yeah?
Could I order a new tool card design?
Sure.
There we go. Anyway, compass. It shows your location on the map. There is no community disagreement more ancient than whether or not the compass should be an item rather than a charm. But given that I have to make as few changes as possible, and that I do actually see good arguments on both sides, I'll have to leave it be. As the only tool in this video, compass remains unchanged. Shard Pendant is likely one of the first tools you'll find, and with its 25% increase to shard drops from enemies, warns you of the impending shard shortage you'll be dealing with throughout the rest of the game. You know, I like the Shard Pendant, and I don't think it should carry the burden of the entire shard system on its back. A lot of people seem to either think shell shards are too hard to come by or dislike the system entirely. And to be clear, I think there are valid criticisms to levy against the shard system, but I'd rather keep the Shard Pendant out of that whole discussion. Take arena enemies for example. For some reason they don't drop shards, meaning you have to go grind for them someplace else, only to then go grind the arena. Now, do I think that's a good system? Not really. At least I haven't heard any good arguments in favor of it. But that doesn't mean the Shard Pendant should make arena enemies drop shards. That just increases reliance on the pendant, making it too powerful to unequip. Instead, if you wanted to make arena enemies drop shards, I think you should just go ahead and do it, pendant or no pendant. That's a long way of saying I think the Shard Pendant is pretty reasonably balanced at the moment. You might argue for 30 or 40%, but I think 25 is just fine. Instead, I'll give it a fun secondary ability to make it a bit more interesting. Solution. Bosses now drop shards upon defeat. Gathering Swarm is back, now in the form of the Magnetite Brooch, a lovely tool for exploration with only a few minor quirks. First, I think it should also work on shell shards. If the only reason why it currently doesn't is something like shell shards aren't magnetic, I think that's a silly reason. I'm generally in favor of sacrificing quote-unquote realism for gameplay. Besides, I'm sure there are many more things it should logically attract than just rosaries, enemy pins for example. But it doesn't because realism isn't the primary goal. Second, because the brooch takes a moment to activate, it usually won't catch loot that falls into spikes. In the first game, this wasn't a problem, but for some reason, and I'm sure there is a good reason, spikes now destroy shards and rosaries. One easy way to avoid this would be to trigger the collection process early for a shard or rosary that hits a spike, cutting the usual activation time short. And third, you still appear to lose any rosaries that were moving towards you when leaving the current scene, which I don't like. Solution. Shell shards are now also attracted by the brooch. Collection starts early for rewards that hit a spike, and rewards are immediately picked up when leaving the room. Next up we have the weighted belt, which is a work of thematic genius. It's heavy so it keeps you in place. Simple as that. It combines the effects of Steady Body and Stalwart Shell from the first game, halving your recoil from hitting enemies and being hit by enemies, as well as increasing invulnerability frames after being hit by 30%. I was never a fan of Stalwart Shell, and I think combining its effect with a charm like Steady Body is actually a pretty good idea. As for changes, all I would suggest is making the tool completely remove recoil from hitting enemies instead of just halving it. Finally, the reason I think this tool deserves to stay in yellow, even though it does involve combat, is because Steady Body wasn't universally praised in the first game. There was always a discussion about whether it was one of the best charms or actually just a noob trap, and as such, I don't mind keeping it yellow. Solution: hit recoil is now removed rather than halved. I've heard quite a few people argue that Barbed Bracelet is too weak in its current state, providing only a 25% damage boost to your needle while doubling the damage you take. But I gotta say, I think Team Cherry were right to keep the damage that low. Needle damage is not something you just hand out lightly. Although for the record, if the tool were in the blue category, I think it might warrant a slight buff. Speaking of color, I'm very conflicted about whether this should be a yellow or a blue tool. On the one hand, it is clearly meant for combat, but on the other, it's not obviously beneficial to put on. For the sake of making as few changes as possible, I'll keep the Barbed Bracelet in the yellow category, at least for now. But I can certainly see the argument for making it blue instead. The only change I'll make then is something I like to do with most nail and needle art related charms and tools, and that is to make them also apply to nail arts, or in this game, needle strikes. Seriously, can we just acknowledge what an unfortunate name that is? Needle strikes, that's Silksong's nail art. Yeah, needle strikes. It just sounds like a regular nail swing. So confusing. Anyway, solution. Barbed Bracelet now also applies to needle strikes. The Dead Bug's Purse is an attempt to alleviate the relatively punishing death mechanic in Silksong. The problem, I think, is that it doesn't go far enough, only returning half your rosaries upon death. That means you're still heavily incentivized to go and collect your cocoon as you would normally, making the tool sort of pointless unless you were to die again before you could retrieve it. Look, if I have to be completely honest, I don't really like this tool. I'm not necessarily a fan of alleviating the punishment for death. It removes a lot of the tension and it sort of defeats the point of stringing up your rosaries. But if you're gonna make a tool like this and put it in the game, you can't only do it halfway because then it's practically useless. Go big or don't go at all. Solution: all of your rosaries are now kept instead of only half. If you're playing on Steel Soul mode, in the place where you would normally find the Dead Bug's Purse, you will instead find the Shell Satchel. It's a pretty cool secret tool that grants you what appears to be the equivalent of 2 entire pouch upgrades when equipped. Now that is quite nice, but it also seems quite strong and exclusively combat related, which means I'm changing it from yellow to blue. Want to see how I'd rebalance the Shell Satchel? Well, better stay tuned for the next video then, because this one is only about yellow tools. Next up, the infamous Magnetite Dice. Now if you know anything about these suckers, anything, you probably know what's coming. That's right, they're going in the blue category as well. I mean really, this tool is pretty much the reason why there's so much confusion about what separates the different colors. With their ability to randomly negate damage, the dice seem so obviously meant for the blue category. Now we've got the Scuttlebrace. I was super curious to hear what popular opinion had to say about this tool, and so I ran a poll asking whether people honestly considered it worth using. 14% were unsure or hadn't used it, 28% said no, 53% answered yes, but only because it looks funny, while only 5% said yes. That's 5% of 5,000 respondents who honestly considers this tool worth using. Looking a bit rough for Scuttlebrace. Here's what it does. By pressing down and sprint, Hornet dashes backwards and will then continue to scurry along floors and walls. It seems like you're meant to use this to dodge enemy attacks, but as people usually ask, why not just turn around and dash away? I don't know. The initial dash does seem to make you go a little further than normal, but the advantage to that honestly seems negligible. It has a few other features, including the fact that it shrinks your hurt box, making some projectiles fly right above you. You're also able to do something akin to a perfect dodge by backdashing just as an enemy swings his weapon, indicated by a loud whoosh sound. But even if it does give you a frame of invincibility, which I don't know for sure, it only seems to work against specific attacks, throwing its utility into question. The Scuttlebrace also impairs your ability to downdash, which some people have shown dislike for. Note that it is still possible to downdash if you do it while floating. The tool's only saving grace is that it used to allow for some crazy skips where you could crawl on walls you weren't meant to. However, as far as I've been able to gather, this has since been patched. Even though there might be 2, maybe even 3 crazed individuals out there who swear by this thing, I think the rest of us can probably agree it needs a buff, and a pretty significant one at that. Solution: upon activation, gain brief invulnerability. If you think that sounds too powerful, notice that I didn't specify the duration of the invulnerability. You could always shorten or lengthen it to find the perfect balance. This change should help give the tool a new identity, allowing you to use it as a free but purely defensive cross-stitch. Moving on, we have the Ascendant's Grip. This tool simply allows you to prevent sliding while clinging to walls. It's a simple quality of life improvement that just feels good to use. I think it fits very well into the yellow category, and I don't want to change its core effect. However, I have something a little extra to add on that might make for some fun edge cases. Solution: increases needle range and damage by 30% while clinging to a wall. This next tool is, well, it's certainly something. When you look up Spider Strings Silksong, the first result isn't the wiki page, but a Reddit comment asking what it even does. Well, according to the wiki, it increases the range of the needle end by 25%, as well as the time enemies spend singing by 1.25 to 2.5 seconds. I thought those seconds started counting after you stopped playing, but after some testing, it seems like that isn't the case. I was confused because I actually didn't know enemies stopped singing at all unless you stopped playing, but it turns out they do. That means you're still only able to stun enemies for as long as you yourself are unable to move. And tell me, how is that possibly beneficial? People like to compare Needlein to Dreamnail, but this is the crucial difference. Dreamnail had clear combat-related utility. Needlein doesn't. I think there's an awesome idea hidden behind this unfortunate design, and I'd love to explore how spider strings could make the Needlein actually useful in combat. But that means we first have to move it out of yellow and into blue. Then we've got one of the crowd favorites, the Silkspeed Anklets. At the cost of draining your silk, this thing will improve your sprinting speed by a whopping 34%. 34? 34. Let's do 35, looks nicer. Now, I love this thing just as much as the next guy, but let me ask you a controversial question. Why does it drain your silk? The obvious answer is because they're the Silkspeed Anklets, which is a fair response, and that is a pretty awesome aesthetic, but in practice, what does this actually add to the gameplay experience? I would say, not a lot. In fact, since the tool doesn't drain enough silk to actually make a difference in combat, all it ends up doing is not allowing you to run fast all the time, as well as accidentally block you from using Clawline. You're welcome to prove me wrong, but I don't think there's a good argument from a gameplay perspective that the Silkspeed Anklets should drain your silk. Solution: running no longer drains your silk. Next up, the Thieves' Mark. Although the wiki page admits of a bevy of circumstantial details, conditions, and exceptions for this tool's activation, it roughly appears to increase your rosary gain by 30% while giving you a 30% risk of losing 3 to 5% of your held rosaries upon taking damage, up to a maximum of 10 to 20 rosaries lost. Mind you, that was the short version. I'm sure there's a reason for all these intricate details to exist, so I'll just deal with the rough averages. I'd like to make this tool slightly more powerful and not reliant on luck. Also, I love that it makes snitch flies passive to you. What an awesome secondary effect. Solution: enemies drop 35% more rosaries, up from 30%. Additionally, every hit now causes you to lose only 2% of your held rosaries, up to a maximum of 10. And now, our first newcomer to the yellow tool slot, the Magma Bell. As it is mostly useful against environmental hazards, I think changing the bell from blue to yellow makes a lot of sense. Honestly, not a huge fan of this tool's design. It's not that fun to use, but the least we can do is make it yellow. And finally, the second tool going from blue to yellow is the Wreath of Purity. This tool is similar to Magma Bell in that it protects you from a specific damage source and as such seems more appropriately placed in the yellow category. Out of pure spite, this is probably something you'll only find once you're almost completely done with bile water and putrefied ducts. It protects you from no more than 17 seconds of muck maggot infestation, which I think is pretty pathetic. And that's after receiving a buff, which it did while I was writing this script. Some of the clips you're seeing are from the old Wreath, which only lasted 9 seconds. As it stands, I'm already in favor of weakening the extremely punishing effects of muck maggot infestation, because I don't think it makes sense for that to be arguably the most detrimental effect in the entire game, taking up a full bind to cure. But regardless, I really can't see the problem with Wreath of Purity not having a durability counter, especially because you find it so late into the game. That would actually make it sort of interesting, providing you different avenues for tackling bile water. Well, the parts you haven't already tackled at this point. Solution: Wreath of Purity now lasts indefinitely. And with that, we've covered every yellow tool in the release version of Silksong. Did you enjoy the video? Would you like to see this become a series? If so, be sure to subscribe to let us know you want more. I'm Haugen, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.